So we're continuing our video explaining now how the JavaScript works when you make selections on the calendars. So we're creating a new JavaScript date object called cur_end_date2, and we're just using the built-in JavaScript date method. And now we need to get the value that we read out of the calendar for the end date and put it into a proper JavaScript date object, because at this point the value that we read out of the calendar, which is this value over here, is just a JavaScript string. It's not actually a date object. So we're calling a method of this date object here. This is an empty date object right now, from format, and this is the date string and this is the date format. So we're passing the date string using this date format to get a date object, and then we do the same thing for the current date, which is the departure date. We do the exact same thing. We get a date object, and then we're saying that if the date the departure date is greater than the return date, then what we want to do is set the value of the return date to the departure date. But we also want to, you can see over here, we also want to go and set the load date of the second calendar. So as soon as we got a pointer to that second calendar control, we were able to go and set the d2.datepicker.disableDates.low to the current date. So this is the value of that was selected in the calendar on the left, the departure date calendar. So now we've set the disabled date, so-called low date, in the calendar on the right, which is the return date, to that value. And then finally we call d2.refresh, which just refreshes the calendar. So let's go through that again right now. So we'll go here, and when I click this button over here, what happens is we're going to go and set the load date of this calendar, which currently is unset. You can see that I can go back in time, way before the departure date, but as soon as I click here, the load date got set to this value over there. So this was this code over there, which was setting the load date, followed by the refresh over here. So this shows you basically how you can get a pointer to the calendar object and then program against it by setting the low date and the high date, and then calling the refresh method. And then you can see that we've also set the load date of the start calendar over here. You can see that we've automatically set the load date here so that you can't select any days before today's date. So let's look at how that was done. So let's go back to the start date here, and you can see that the load date, we've set the load date by using a JavaScript function called setLoadDate. And then if we look at the prototype of that function, we can see that this function just needs to return a value. So if we go now and look in our JavaScript functions, we can see that setLoadDate is just returning today's date over here. So this is the JavaScript function to return today's date. So this function over there is causing the load date on the departure date calendar to be set to today's date. So I can't depart before today for obvious reasons. And then finally you can see just I've got this show message function over here. So when I go there and make a selection and then make a selection, I'm just showing what the trip duration is over there. So there's the trip duration, and that was done by simply going to controls, putting in a freeform control which has some text in a P that is initially hidden, and you can see there's two spans, one called T1 and one called T2, that have my trip duration. And then in both, in the event that on the selection event for both controls, for the start calendar and the end calendar, if I go quickly look at the events, I'll see that we're calling the JavaScript function to set the date. So we're out of time now, but you can see here there